The first light of dawn had barely crept over the eastern ridge when John Blackwood woke to an unfamiliar sound. It wasn't the usual chorus of his ranch, not the lowing of cattle or the distant yip of coyotes. This was different, a soft, rhythmic percussion that seemed to pulse through the morning air. John sat up in bed, his weathered face creased with confusion. At 58, he'd spent nearly 3 decades on this remote stretch of Montana land, and in all those years, he'd grown accustomed to solitude. His nearest neighbor was 12 miles down the dirt road, and visitors were rare enough to be memorable. He pulled on his jeans and boots, grabbed the shotgun he kept by the door, not out of fear, but habit, and stepped onto the wooden porch of his modest ranch house. The sound was clearer now, a gentle drumming, almost like heartbeats, coming from the direction of the creek that marked the eastern boundary of his property. Through the morning mist that clung to the tall grass, John could make out figures moving slowly toward his house. As they drew closer, he recognized them as a small group of Native Americans, men, women, and children, perhaps 15 in all. They carried minimal possessions, some backpacks, a few bundles wrapped in cloth, and what appeared to be ceremonial items, including the small drums that had woken him. John placed his shotgun against the porch railing and walked down the steps. The group stopped about 20 yards from his house. An older man with long gray hair braided down his back stepped forward, but his eyes remained downcast, fixed on the ground between them. "Mr. Blackwood," the man said, his voice carrying across the distance with quiet dignity. "I am Robert Running Wolf of the Blackfeet Nation. We come seeking temporary shelter." John studied the group. They looked exhausted, their faces drawn with fatigue, and something else, a quiet desperation that made his chest tighten. "How do you know my name?" John asked, his voice gruff from disuse. "Your father allowed my father to hunt on this land many years ago," Running Wolf replied, still not meeting John's gaze. "When we had nowhere else to turn, I remembered the stories of the Blackwood who respected our ways." The mention of his father made John's jaw clench. Harold Blackwood had been dead for 15 years, but the complicated legacy he'd left behind still haunted these hills. "What's happened? Why do you need shelter?" John asked, taking a few steps closer. A young woman holding a child of perhaps 4 or 5 years spoke up. "The reservation has been evacuated. The wildfires, they're moving too fast. Emergency services are overwhelmed, and the evacuation centers are beyond capacity." Now John understood. The summer had been brutally dry, and for weeks, smoke had tinged the horizon to the north. He'd been tracking the news on his radio, but out here, information came in fragments. "We will not impose," Running Wolf said. "We can camp by the creek. We ask only for safe passage, and perhaps clean water. When the authorities have contained the fire, we will return to our homes." John looked at the group again. There were elderly among them, and several children. Their clothes were covered in ash, and they carried the acrid smell of smoke. Behind them, in the far distance, he could see the ominous gray-orange glow against the sky. 15 years of chosen isolation stretched between John and these unexpected visitors. 15 years of speaking more to his horses than to people. 15 years of nursing wounds that never seemed to heal. "How many more of you are coming?" he asked. "No more. Just us," Running Wolf answered. "We were separated from the main evacuation. The others went south to Browning." John nodded slowly, his decision forming before he fully recognized it. "There's the old bunkhouse beyond the barn. It's basic, but it's got a roof and walls. The well water is clean. You can use the outdoor kitchen by the corral." For the first time, Running Wolf raised his eyes to meet John's. In them was a profound gratitude that made John look away, uncomfortable with its weight. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Running Wolf said simply. As the group moved toward the bunkhouse, John noticed a teenage boy staring at him with undisguised suspicion. The boy carried a drum slung across his body and walked protectively beside an elderly woman. John turned and walked back to his house, wondering what his father would have done in this situation and why that still mattered to him after all these years. Inside, he put on a pot of coffee and stared out the window at the newcomers settling into his property. For better or worse, his solitude had been broken by the soft drums of dawn. By midday, the temperature had climbed to 93 degrees, and the smoke from the northern fires had thickened, casting an eerie orange light over the ranch. John had spent the morning in his workshop, repairing a broken fence post driver, or at least pretending to. In reality, he was avoiding the strangers who had upended his carefully constructed isolation. From his window, he watched as they organized themselves with quiet efficiency. The bunkhouse, unused for nearly a decade except for storing hay, was being cleaned out. Someone had started a fire in the outdoor kitchen stone pit, and water was being carried from the well in buckets and old cooking pots. John sighed, picked up his hat, and stepped outside. It was time to establish some ground rules. As he approached the bunkhouse, he noticed the teenager from earlier sitting on a stump, carefully adjusting the tension on his drum. The boy looked up, his dark eyes following John with the same wariness as before. "Your name?" John asked, stopping a few feet away. "Michael," the boy answered, his tone flat. "Michael Running Wolf." "You're Robert's son?" "Grandson." John nodded, unsure how to continue. Conversation had never been his strong suit, even before he'd retreated from society. "That drum. It was what woke me this morning." Michael's hand stilled on the drum. "It's a reminder of who we are. When we had to leave quickly, this is what I took." He paused, then added with a hint of defiance, "It's sacred." Before John could respond, Robert Running Wolf emerged from the bunkhouse, wiping dust from his hands. "Mr. Blackwood," he acknowledged, "we are grateful for your hospitality." John cleared his throat. "Call me John. And it's temporary, like you said." He gestured toward the north. "Any news about the fire?" Robert shook his head. "Cell service is unreliable here. We have a battery-powered radio, but the updates are infrequent." "I have a satellite phone in the house," John offered reluctantly. "For emergencies. You can use it to check on your people." Robert's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "That would be very helpful. Thank you." As they walked toward the main house, John laid out his expectations. "I keep to myself for a reason. I'd appreciate if your group stays in the area around the bunkhouse and barn. The south pasture is off limits. I've got skittish horses there. The creek water is fine for washing, but use the well for drinking." Robert listened attentively, nodding. "We will respect your boundaries, John. We understand the value of peace and privacy." Inside the house, John retrieved the satellite phone from a drawer and handed it to Robert, then retreated to the kitchen to give him privacy. Through the window, he could see several children playing a quiet game with stones in the shade of an old cottonwood tree. The elderly woman he'd noticed earlier sat nearby, watching them with tired eyes. When Robert finished his calls, his expression was grim. "The fire has jumped the containment line. They're saying it could be a week before it's controlled enough for evacuation orders to be lifted." A week. The word hit John like a physical blow. A week of strangers disrupting the careful rhythm of his days. A week of memories and interactions he'd spent years avoiding. "A week," John repeated, his voice tight. "That's longer than I expected." Robert studied him carefully. "We can try to find alternative arrangements if our presence is too burdensome." John thought of the children he'd seen playing, the elderly woman, the exhaustion etched on all their faces. "No," he said finally. "You can stay. But I've got work to do around here, and I expect everyone to pull their own weight." "Of course," Robert agreed. "My people are not afraid of hard work. If you show us what needs doing, we will help." As they stepped back outside, the young woman John had seen earlier, the one with the small child, approached them hesitantly. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm Lisa Whitehorse," she introduced herself. "I wanted to thank you personally for taking us in." Her child, a little girl with pigtails, hid shyly behind her mother's legs. "This is Emma." John nodded awkwardly, unsure how to respond to gratitude. "There's a storm cellar behind the house," he said instead. "If the winds shift and the fire gets closer, that's where we'll go." Lisa smiled slightly at his practical response. "We've prepared a meal. It's simple, but there's enough for everyone, including you, if you'd care to join us." The invitation hung in the air between them. John hadn't shared a meal with anyone in years, preferring to eat alone at his kitchen table, often reading old paperbacks to fill the silence. "Maybe," he said noncommittally. "I've got things to finish first." As he turned away, he caught sight of Michael watching the exchange from a distance, his expression unreadable but somehow challenging. The boy's presence made John uneasy in a way he couldn't quite define, as if Michael could see through the walls John had built around himself. Back in his workshop, John tried to focus on his repairs, but his mind kept drifting to the unexpected guests and the fires drawing closer by the hour. The soft, occasional sound of Michael's drum floated through the air, a reminder that his sanctuary was no longer entirely his own. The evening brought a slight cooling of the air, but no relief from the smoke. John had spent the afternoon checking on his cattle in the western pasture, making sure they had access to enough water in case he needed to move them quickly. When he returned to the ranch house, sweaty and tired, he was surprised to find several buckets of fresh water waiting on his porch. Inside, his kitchen table held a covered plate, some kind of stew with a piece of flatbread. Despite his instinct to maintain distance, hunger won out, and he sat down to eat. The stew was rich with flavors he couldn't immediately identify, some kind of game meat with wild herbs. It was undeniably good. After washing up, John stepped outside. The rhythmic sound of drums drew him toward the area between the bunkhouse and the outdoor kitchen, where the group had gathered in a circle. This wasn't the soft, solemn drumming from the morning. This was more animated, accompanied by singing in a language John didn't understand. He kept his distance, watching from the shadow of an old oak tree. Michael and two older men played drums while Robert told what appeared to be a story, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. The children sat wide-eyed, completely absorbed, while the adults nodded in recognition of familiar tales. Lisa noticed John first, standing at the edge of the light, cast by their small fire. She said something quietly to Robert, who paused his story and looked up. "John," Robert called, "please, join us if you wish." John hesitated, then slowly approached the circle. An empty space was made for him on one of the logs they were using as seating. "We're sharing stories," Robert explained, "reminding the young ones of our history, our connection to this land." "I didn't mean to interrupt," John said. "You're not interrupting," Lisa assured him. "This is your land. We're grateful you allow us to be here." The elderly woman John had seen earlier spoke up. "I remember your father," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Harold Blackwood. He used to trade with our people." John stiffened at the mention of his father. "That was a long time ago." "He was respected," she continued. "He understood the old agreements between your family and ours." "My father had his own ideas about a lot of things," John replied, his tone making it clear he didn't share all of them. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Michael broke it by beginning a gentle rhythm on his drum. Soon, the other drummers joined in, and the tension eased as the music filled the space where difficult words might have been. Later, as the gathering dispersed and people headed to the bunkhouse to sleep, Robert walked with John a short distance. "The old woman who spoke, that's my mother, Sarah," Robert explained. "She remembers when the boundaries between our peoples were more fluid." John nodded but said nothing. "Your father helped our community during a difficult winter in the 1980s, Robert continued, "before the casino brought revenue to the reservation, before the tribal council built the new health center." "My father talked about those days," John admitted reluctantly. "He believed in." He trailed off, unsure how to explain his father's complicated philosophies. "In honoring the land and the connections between all who live on it," Robert finished for him. "That's why I remembered this place when we needed somewhere to go." They stopped at the fork in the path, where Robert would head to the bunkhouse and John to his home. "There's something I should tell you," Robert said, his voice growing serious. "We didn't just come here because of the fire. There's been trouble on the reservation, political disagreements that turned unfriendly." John frowned. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that makes it safer for some of us to be away for a while," Robert answered cryptically. The fire provided an opportunity to leave without drawing attention. Before John could ask for clarification, they heard a shout from near the creek. Michael came running up the path, his face urgent in the moonlight. "Grandfather, Emma is missing." Lisa can't find her anywhere in the bunkhouse or around the fire. John immediately shifted into action mode. How long has she been gone? Lisa put her to sleep 2 hours ago, Michael explained. She just went to check on her and found her bed empty. She's 4 years old in strange surroundings, John said, already moving toward the barn to get flashlights. She couldn't have gone far. As Robert gathered others from the bunkhouse to organize a search, John brought out flashlights and a map of the property. "We'll divide into groups," he said with an authority that surprised even himself. "The creek is the most dangerous area in the dark. Michael and I will check there first. Robert, take 2 others and check the north pasture. The rest should stay near the buildings in case she's just hiding." As John handed Michael a flashlight, their eyes met briefly. The boy's earlier suspicion had been replaced by something else, a reluctant acknowledgement that they needed each other now. "If she wandered toward the creek," John said quietly to Michael as they headed out, "we need to find her quickly." With the smoke-hazed moon providing little light and the distant fires casting an ominous glow on the northern horizon, they set off into the darkness, calling Emma's name. The creek cut through John's property like a silver ribbon in the darkness, its gentle burbling normally a soothing sound. Tonight, it filled John with dread as he and Michael swept their flashlights along its banks, calling Emma's name. "Why would she come out here alone?" Michael asked, his voice tight with worry. John kept his eyes on the ground, looking for small footprints. Children don't think like adults. Something catches their attention, a sound, an animal, and they follow it without considering danger. They had been searching for 20 minutes when John spotted something that made his heart drop. A tiny pink sock caught on a branch near the water's edge. He picked it up, showed it to Michael. "It's hers," Michael confirmed, his face paling in the harsh beam of the flashlight. John played his light downstream, then motioned for Michael to follow. The current's not strong, but if she fell in... The unfinished thought hung between them as they moved more quickly now, scanning both sides of the creek. The terrain grew rougher, with large boulders creating small rapids and pools. "Wait," John said suddenly, holding up his hand. "Listen." Over the sound of the water came a faint whimpering. John directed his flashlight toward a small hollow beneath an overhanging rock formation about 15 feet from the creek bank. There, curled into a ball, her clothes damp and her face streaked with dirt, sat little Emma. "Emma," Michael called, relief washing over his features. The girl looked up, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't move. John approached slowly, crouching down to appear less intimidating. "Hey there," he said softly. "You gave everyone quite a scare, Emma." "I saw a rabbit," she said in a small voice. "I followed it. Then I couldn't find my way back." "That happens sometimes," John said, keeping his tone gentle. "But we found you now. Your mom is really worried." Emma looked at him with uncertainty, then at Michael, who had moved closer. "I'm cold," she admitted. John removed his jacket and wrapped it around her tiny shoulders. It engulfed her completely, making her look even smaller. "Michael is going to carry you back, okay? And I'm going to let the others know we found you." Michael lifted Emma carefully. As they made their way back, John used a handheld radio to contact Robert, who had been searching the north pasture with 2 others. "We found her by the creek," John reported. "She's cold and scared but appears unharmed. We're bringing her back now." Lisa was waiting at the edge of the property, her face a mask of anxiety that broke into relief when she saw Michael carrying her daughter. She ran to them, taking Emma into her arms, crying and checking her for injuries all at once. "She followed a rabbit," John explained simply. "Got lost near the creek bend." Lisa looked at John, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "Both of you." As the group returned to the bunkhouse, John found himself walking alongside Michael. The teenage boy seemed different now, less guarded, less hostile. "You're good in a crisis," Michael observed quietly. "My grandfather says that's when you see who someone really is." John considered this. "Your grandfather seems like a wise man." "He is," Michael agreed. "He also says that sometimes people hide from others because they're really hiding from themselves." The statement caught John off guard. He glanced at Michael, who was staring straight ahead, his profile illuminated by the distant glow of the bunkhouse lights. "That sounds like something my father might have said," John admitted after a long pause. "Is that why you don't like to talk about him?" Michael asked. "Because he knew you too well." The directness of the question would normally have made John retreat into stony silence. But something about the night's events, about the shared purpose they'd found in searching for Emma, made him answer honestly. "My father had strong opinions about how I should live my life," he said. "When I chose differently, it created a rift between us that never healed before he died." Michael nodded slowly. "My father left when I was 6. Sometimes I wonder if it's better to have fought with your father than never to have known him at all." They reached the bunkhouse, where the rest of the group had gathered around Emma. She sat wrapped in blankets, drinking hot chocolate, already recounting her adventure with the wide-eyed enthusiasm of a child who hadn't yet grasped the danger she'd been in. Sarah, Robert's mother, approached John. Her weathered face was solemn. "The land tested us tonight," she said, "and you helped us meet that test. Tomorrow, we will show our gratitude." John started to protest that no gratitude was necessary, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. This was important to her, to all of them. "All right," he agreed, surprising himself. As he walked back to his house, John realized that for the first time in years, his ranch didn't feel emptier for having other people on it. Instead, it felt as though a long-held breath was finally being released. He slept better that night than he had in months, the soft sound of distant drums no longer an intrusion, but a reminder that sometimes connection was a form of shelter too. Morning broke with a strange stillness. The smoke had thickened overnight, casting a sepia tone over the landscape. John rose early, checked the satellite phone for fire updates, and found that the blaze had shifted slightly to the northwest, still dangerous, but moving away from his property. Outside, he was surprised to find Robert waiting for him on the porch. "The fire's changing direction," John told him. "That's good news for us, though not for those in its new path." Robert nodded. "We received word from our community. The evacuation center in Browning is overwhelmed. They're asking people with alternative arrangements to stay where they are for at least another 5 days." John absorbed this information. A week ago, the prospect of hosting strangers for nearly 2 weeks would have been unthinkable. Now he found himself nodding. "That's fine. You can stay until it's safe to return." "Thank you," Robert said. "In return, we would like to share something with you. A ceremony of gratitude, if you will allow it." John hesitated. "I'm not one for ceremonies." "It is as much for us as it is for you," Robert explained. "A way to honor the shelter you've provided and the help you gave in finding Emma." Before John could respond, Michael approached, carrying several leather pouches and what looked like bundles of herbs. "Everything's ready, grandfather," he reported. Robert turned back to John. "Will you join us? It would mean a great deal." Against his better judgment, John agreed. "Let me check on the cattle first. I'll meet you by the bunkhouse in an hour." When John returned, he found the group had arranged themselves in a circle near the old cottonwood tree. In the center, they had built a small fire in a portable metal basin, respectful of the fire danger and John's property. Lisa motioned for John to sit in a space they had left open, directly across from Robert. Emma, seemingly recovered from her adventure, sat beside her mother, watching everything with curious eyes. Robert began speaking in his native language, his voice taking on a rhythmic quality that reminded John of the drums. After several minutes, he switched to English. "We offer thanks to the 4 directions," he said, "to the spirits of this land that has sheltered both our peoples, to John Blackwood, who opened his home when we had nowhere else to go." Sarah, sitting to Robert's right, produced a small bundle wrapped in blue cloth. She unwrapped it to reveal a beaded medallion on a leather cord, intricate work with symbols John didn't recognize. "This was made by my grandmother," she explained, her voice carrying despite its softness. "It represents the connection between the land and those who respect it. I have kept it for many years, waiting for the right moment to pass it on." She handed it to Robert, who stood and walked across the circle to John. "This is not given lightly," he said. It carries the history of our people and our gratitude for your kindness." John felt a tightness in his throat as he accepted the medallion. The beadwork caught the filtered sunlight, blues and whites forming a pattern that reminded him of flowing water. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "No words are needed," Robert assured him. "Just acceptance." Michael began playing his drum, a gentle rhythm that was soon joined by the other drummers. Unlike the previous night's music, this had a ceremonial quality, purposeful and solemn. As the drumming continued, Lisa approached John with a small clay bowl containing a mixture of herbs. "If you're willing, this is white sage and sweetgrass," she explained. "We use it for purification and blessing." John nodded his consent, and she used an eagle feather to waft the smoke toward him. The scent was earthy and sweet, reminding him oddly of his childhood, of summers spent exploring the very creek where Emma had been lost. When the ceremony concluded, the group dispersed quietly, returning to their daily tasks with a sense of purpose. John noticed they seemed more at ease now, moving around his property with less hesitation. Robert remained with John as the others left. "Your father participated in ceremonies like this," he said. "Did you know?" John nodded slowly. "He mentioned it sometimes. I never understood why it mattered so much to him. Perhaps it was his way of acknowledging that there are some things bigger than our individual concerns," Robert suggested. "Some connections that transcend our differences." As they walked toward the barn, where several of the younger men had offered to help with repairs, John found himself telling Robert about his father's final years, the arguments they'd had about John's decision to isolate himself on the ranch, to cut ties with the outside world after his divorce and the death of his only son in Afghanistan. "He thought I was wasting my life out here alone," John confessed. Maybe he was right. Robert considered this. "Solitude has its purpose," he said. "It allows for healing and reflection. But there comes a time when connection becomes necessary again." John touched the beaded medallion, now hanging around his neck. "Maybe that time has come," he admitted quietly. Above them, a hawk circled in the smoke-haze sky, free despite the changing winds and threatening fires. John watched it soar and felt something shift within him, a willingness to consider that his father's vision and his own might not have been as far apart as he'd always believed.